episode of the Executive Encore. My name is Patricia Muir. I am your host today, and this is where we blend motivational, personal stories, and practical tips to help you prepare for a fulfilling life as you approach the crossroads of 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond. As your host, we will explore today what it means to fly solo, redefine your life on your terms, flourish, and find fulfillment as you live longer. This video podcast is tailor made for women like you, women executives and business owners, poised at the edge of this transition, facing the future with courage and navigating it solo. Whether you are single due to divorce, widowhood, or personal choice, this episode speaks directly to the heart of any ambitious woman standing at the cusp of this change. My guest today is Marianne Oehser. After 30 years in the corporate sector, Marianne tried twice to retire. Her retirement led to divorce, and she realized that there was a strong connection between retirement and marital issues. She was then determined to solve these problems by becoming a retirement coach. Marianne is now co-founder and partner with Next Chapter Lifestyle Advisors, a consulting service to help men and women plan their next chapter after they step away from their career, profession, or business. Many people face this time of life on their own, whether they become divorced, widowed, or perhaps they never married. Marianne calls this flying solo. I'm delighted to invite Marianne to share her wisdom and experience about transitioning to your next chapter, perhaps on your own. I ask you to consider this. This new chapter in life that we call retirement is not an end. It's an inception of a symphony composed by you, for you, and about you. It's your encore. So hello, Marianne. So nice to see you today, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Patricia. It's a delight to be here.
Okay, so Marianne, I'd like to get right into it and ask you to define what it means to be flying solo at this phase of our lives.
Well, you did a very good job of touching on that, Patricia. It can be people who have made a lifelong decision to be solo, or that's just how their life worked out. But it's also people who are divorced and widowed, and that is particularly true for recently divorced and widowed people as they move into this next chapter of their life. It presents some real challenges. But also, many people consider flying solo, if you will, if you are in a relationship but don't have any children, because that can have an impact on later in life decisions about who's going to be your support. But for today, we're just going to be talking about people who either have chosen to, but most especially who find themselves solo as they begin this journey.
You know, it is a very broad topic, isn't it? Like there's very many changes that can happen around that time. And I don't think it's something that people really think about as they're going to this phase of life. Of course, we've talked about so many people think it's about the money, but there's so much around relationships and about what could happen. So what are some of the unique struggles and challenges that people who are single, what they face when they're transitioning or after they've transitioned and then they find themselves single?
A good question. I think it begins first of all with your mindset, and
Mm-hmm.
it's your mindset not only about being single, but about this time of your life, because our mindset has such a huge impact on the possibilities that we see, but also the choices that we make. So if your mindset is being single is a negative thing, that would be a really good place to start to look for how you might want to shift it. Because if you see it as negative, well, the choices that you're going to make are going to lead in that direction. And it's the same thing about this new chapter of your life. If you look at it as the best is over because I've had such a great career, and now how can this time of your life anywhere come close to being like that? If you look at it as the best is over or it's all downhill, again, that mindset is going to define the possibilities you see and the choices you make. So look hard at your mindset to be sure that that whatever is unfolding for you is perfect, and that it's full of opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think that one of the big things that I know for a fact that one of the big things that solo women particularly face as they move from their career where they're surrounded by people involved in the things that are doing, probably have made friendships with people, with their business associates and customers and clients and whatever, to move away from that, even though you think that you're going to hold on to some of those relationships, when the commonality that built those relationships is gone, they typically just fade.
Mhm.
And the challenge, the reason that that's a challenge is because it you can face social isolation, and social isolation and loneliness is what the healthcare providers are now calling the silent beasts, because they have such a huge detrimental impact on your health, both physically and mentally. And so, particularly as flying solo, the risk of that happening is greater if you are not paying attention to the strength of your social relationships.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think another big one, particularly for people who are more recently single, is the being comfortable doing things alone. I remember when I was divorced, and in the beginning, it was exhilarating because you were free of what was not a good relationship. But then it got to time for, oh, it's time for vacation. Am I comfortable traveling alone?
Mm.
And the weird thing about that for me is having my job, my corporate job required a lot of travel. I traveled all over the world and I always traveled alone. And it never once occurred to me to be concerned about traveling alone. And then flying solo, it was all of a sudden, well, maybe there's something wrong with traveling alone. And I don't know where that came from,
Mm.
except that it had to be some kind of a deep-seated stereotype. And so I think that that's a pitfall that that particularly women can fall into if you find yourself solo, particularly and you're not used to it.
Mhm. Mhm. And especially, I want to add on to that, like internalizing that.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you traveled all those years on your own, feeling a lot of trust in yourself to be able to navigate whatever you were doing. Then suddenly the stereotype comes into our life that perhaps older women shouldn't travel on their own, or that you're going to need assistance in traveling now. And it's interesting how those stereotypes will seep into our mindset and we internalize it, and that weakens our own self-trust in what our capabilities are for flying solo, right?
Oh, Patricia, that is so right on, so right on. And so if you're the point is if you're aware of that and you catch yourself thinking it, it's much easier to say, oh, well, is that really true? And challenge that misconception that you can have. And
Mm.
there and today, just talking about traveling alone right now, there are so many options. I mean, first of all, if you wanted to travel with a group, there are an increasing number of single women's groups that are traveling, small groups based on interest things. There are lots of programs, but you, and also you're really only as alone as you want to be. You
Mm.
certainly can strike up conversations at dinner with a couple, for example, that's traveling, and share your experiences through those kinds of conversations. Because I
Mhm.
think one of the hard things about traveling for pleasure alone is not having somebody to share the experience with. It's a little bit different when you're traveling for business because you don't aren't really sharing the experience. But when you're traveling to Paris and you want to share the excitement of that, that's when having someone to talk to makes a lot of difference.
Mhm, mhm. And yes, I've seen a rise in group travel for women. And one of the stereotypes that I rail against, I guess you'd say, is that this is only for women of a certain age, and then there's only certain options of travel, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And there's a good website called, and I'll need to send it to you the exact URL, but it's called Single Traveling World or something like that. And
Mm.
they are always coming up with either tour suggestions or single supplements on a cruise. A cruise is a great way to travel by yourself because obviously it's built-in opportunity to meet people. And so it has a lot of great suggestions for things that are appropriate for singles.
Mhm. Mhm.
Another thing about that is being comfortable eating alone. It used to be a huge stigma that nobody went out for dinner by themselves. And now, according to some research that was recently published by Open Table, the
Yeah.
reservation, reservations for dinner, the number of people that are dining solo has increased significantly and is continuing to do
Wow.
that. So if you feel like going out for dinner and you don't have somebody that you want to go with, look at it as a great opportunity to just savor the experience yourself.
I would love that.
Yeah,
Decide on a restaurant that I like, the type of food I like, where I want to go, dress up the way I want to sort of have an event, like have a nice evening out with myself. And
absolutely.
yeah, that
And
sounds.
the interesting thing I learned, having made that choice when I was single, and it was not for business, and like when you travel for business, you're sort of expected to go out for dinner by yourself. But for pleasure, I found that as much as I enjoy the conversation of whomever I'm with, I don't notice my food as much. And so when I'm by myself, I just savor the whole experience and I taste my food differently.
Mm,
And it's just a different kind of
a
experience.
different experience, yeah. And so to be aware that you can invite those different experiences into your life, and that they are opportunities. Going back to what you were saying before, it's not a negative. This is my opportunity to savor this food in a different way without having the pressure of conversation, unless I want to speak to a wait staff or someone else, right?
Or maybe somebody else that's there. You never know.
Yeah. And so we've talked about travel and about, spending time on our own, such as having a date with ourselves, going out for dinner with ourselves. Are there other struggles or challenges that singles face when they are in that transition?
The other one that I have found is that many times, especially if you're single, not by choice necessarily, is the desire to look for another companion.
Mm,
And that is a very real and wonderful situation. I'd love to have that conversation with you another time because it's a long one and there are lots of things to consider in terms of how to approach finding another relationship in a healthy and positive way, and
mm,
how to what pitfalls to avoid, and what things that you can do to make sure that it is a success, that the outcome is successful.
mhm, mhm. Okay, so that's moving forward. So, do you have particular tips or strategies for singles or those people flying solo? And I just want to express that the very fact that you call it flying solo elevates it for me. Okay,
But that's really why I chose that phrase,
I like that.
because yeah, it should be looked at as a wonderful opportunity to explore who you are and
Yeah,
what you're all about by yourself.
yeah. I envision blue skies, which we have today, just open air, and just being able to experience that solo feeling in a good way. So I'll get back to my question
Yes, yeah.
about tips and strategies for flourishing in the next chapter if you find yourself single. And we do have to make the point that any one of us can find ourselves single at any point in our life, whether it's choice or whether it's something that we have a loss. So, what are some of your tips and strategies?
Well, the first one is to assess your social network. And by that, I mean, it's like taking inventory. And what I mean by that is, we accumulate acquaintances and relationships over time, and some of them are really good for us, but some of them are pretty draining.
Hmm.
This is a great opportunity to do two things. First of all, to identify the relationships that are draining to you and figure out ways to lessen the interaction with those people. Because why in the world would you want to have something that is taking away from this opportunity to be happy?
Hmm. Hmm.
The other is, where do you want to strengthen that social network? I mentioned that when we leave our career, we will lose some of those people that we consider to be friends, and that needs to be replaced. That social network needs to be strengthened. I mean, the you may have read some of the recent reports that have come from the Harvard study of adult development, which has been going on for 85 years now.
Hmm.
And that study started out to identify what kinds of things positively impacted people's health. And they've been it's a longevity study, a longitudinal study, which means it's been going on continuously with the same people, and then some of them die, of course, and they're replaced, and so they're studying them over time. And what they have found, and they've written several releases about that recently, is that the number one impact on your health, according to that study, and many others have collaborated it, is the strength of your social relationships. It has such a huge impact on both your physical and mental and emotional health.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
taking action, taking that inventory and then taking actions to strengthen your social network and your existing relationships is a very important
Yeah.
step, especially as you move into this time of all new beginnings.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking about that, like the strong bonds that we have, and to invest in those relationships, to have strong bonds, we have to have a very clear idea of what kind of relationships we want. And, we did have relationships in our careers that were, beneficial at that time, may not benefit us at this time. And what I mean by that is that they don't add to our life anymore. So we do need to more or less, I think you said this, assess our relationships. I know I've met some people who their idea of retirement was that they were going to be able to play more tennis. This was one example. And so that would keep their social um, interaction complete as well. But what they realized was that when they retired, the people that they played tennis with and had those relationships with weren't retiring, they were still working. So they didn't have the same social network anymore in playing tennis. So they realized that they had to look for new partners to play tennis with. And
Very interesting and very true.
yeah, so this relationship and creating strong bonds as we live longer is key. I can experience, I can share from my experience as well how choosing not just friends for friends' sake, but friends for how we elevate one another's lives, right?
Very true.
Yeah.
Very, very true.
Yeah.
Another thing I think that's important to do is to build what a resource space. I don't know what else to call it, but some key people that that you can count on for maybe you need a ride. For example, you're going to the ophthalmologist and they're going to dilate your eyes and you can't drive yourself home, or God forbid you fall and need to go to the emergency room, but also somebody that you can call in an emergency to help you, but also even people that you can count on to be honest with you. I was interviewing a man one time for a course I was doing on flying solo, and one of the things that he said that he valued most was the people in his golf group that he'd become close to, and one man in particular who he knew he could count on to give him feedback if they saw that he was mentally slipping a little bit,
Mm,
or that there's something that needed attention that he didn't see himself.
mm,
And so having that resource base that that you can fall back on, I think, is extremely important.
mhm, mhm. And it takes courage to be that vulnerable. And
Indeed, it does.
but I think that's what we acquire through living longer is that we can be vulnerable and see that as being a positive way to have authentic relationships as well, right? I
Right.
think that's a great point that you make. Hmm.
And I think the last tip, though, is to be very clear in your own mind for what flourishing means to you.
Mm,
What does it mean to feel like you're excited about your life, that you feel like it's fulfilling, that it's balanced, some individual activities, some with groups, some high energy activities, some more reflective. What does that look like for you?
yeah.
And how does that specifically translate into how you want to spend your time?
Mm. That is such a great segue into introducing Executive Encore segment of this video. And it's called Every Moment Matters. And you've just spoken to it. So, Marianne, could you please share a time in your life, a pivotal moment, when you recognized what fulfillment or flourishing looked like for you?
It actually came in two steps. It was, you mentioned before that I'd retired twice, and the first one was a disaster. Well, as I was preparing for retiring again, I knew I needed to go to something that's just kind of who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And as I searched for what that would be, I reflected on the fact that since my first disaster, I met a wonderful man whom I'm now married to for 23 years, and we have a wonderful relationship, and that was 12 years ago. And I said I really wanted to help other people have the wonderful relationship like I have. And so in the moment, I can still remember the day that occurred, that dawned on me that I really wanted to do it. So then I studied relationship coaching for a year before I retired. And then the second step of that was, as I was working with couples, I found that many of them came to me with the same story. And that was, we used to have a great relationship, and now all we do is bicker and fight. What was the common denominator? Retirement. So the second part of my pivotal moment was realizing the impact that retirement has on relationships and how deeply I wanted to make a difference there. And I can't even begin to tell you what it makes me feel like when I'm working with someone who is struggling with something, and they see the light bulb and they can see what they can do differently, and everything shifts.
Mm-hmm.
That's fulfillment for me.
Mm-hmm. The expectations of couples as they enter retirement can be completely different from one another. And I'm sure that causes a lot of friction. I've seen it happen with some of my clients where one had this idea of moving somewhere, and his wife turned to him and she said, "When were you going to tell me that?" Like the expectations were so different. So I would say that would be another great conversation for you and I to have on a video podcast.
Oh,
So
and Patricia, you are so right about that. I mean, so completely right about that. And I have a lot of stories that are kind of funny about it. But it is the
yes,
number one thing that a couple has to take into consideration is, what are they assuming that the
yeah,
other one is assuming differently?
yeah. It's funny for us to look at as outsiders, but a lot of people struggle with that
Yeah. Oh, big
because they
time.
have a lot of history together, right?
Yeah.
And back to the flying solo, sometimes they do plan very well together, and then suddenly they lose their partner before or after their plans are in action. It's such a shame, really,
That's
but
sad.
something to be aware of, right? So, Marianne, how can our audience reach you, and what action would you like them to take?
Well, I have written a book called Your Happiness Portfolio for Retirement. It's not about the money. I mean, money's important for retirement, but the book has nothing to do with money. And it's all about how to design this time of your life so that you're investing your time, your other very precious resource, in a way that is going to make you flourish.
Mhm.
And there are lots of exercises and tips and things for building this time of your life. And so I would encourage your listeners to read my book. And many people think that I wrote it because it's based on my experience for the last, but at that point it was 10 years of helping people through transitions of all sorts, but especially retirement. And so it was written to help people do that on their own if they want. But I've also found that many people have great intentions about doing it, and then it kind of never happens. And so
Mm,
one of the things about working with a coach is you have that accountability. You're going to show up for a session. You better have done your homework, and so it actually happens. Plus, the experience is so much richer with the discussion.
mm.
So my suggestion would be, read my book, and if that's not enough, I would be delighted to work with you or talk to you about what working together would look like. And you can reach me at Marianne, which is spelled Marianne, at nextchapterlifestyleadvisors.com.
Okay. And I will add all the contact information in the show notes. So if anyone wasn't able to pick that up. Also, in this Sunday's newsletter, I will be featuring Marianne's video podcast and uh, blogging more about the topic. And Marianne, you made me think about, retirement is not a do-it-yourself project. Is that like so many people think they can pick up a book and that, or pick up 5 books and they can get into action. It really does help to have a champion beside you, such as your coach, someone who's gone through the experience in particular, and work with you on some of the struggles and give you some good strategies to work on and keep you accountable, like you say. Okay, so I'll also include a link to the book in the newsletter. So I want to thank my incredible audience for sticking with us today, and Marianne's amazing followers. What are your takeaways? My takeaway is that flying solo isn't just a path of solitude, but a very powerful journey of self-discovery and resilience. It's time for us to realize the most important relationship that you will carry into this phase is the one with yourself. This is where your encore begins. So this has been tailor-made for you women executives and business owners who are on the edge of this transition and facing the future with courage and navigating it solo. I'm sure you'll agree that this is a very important episode for any executive woman to watch, whether she is in a relationship or whether she's single now. This is to orchestrate her own encore. Please give us a thumbs up on the YouTube video. Share with your friends and your family. Put in the comments what your big takeaway was today. I think we all know now that by liking a video, it will go out to more people. By putting in a comment, it will bring more engagement. So that's my ask for today. That's my call to action. And no matter what your age or your perspective on well-being and fulfillment, you could be a guest on my show. Let's connect and inspire together. So visit my website at patriciamuir.com and read the weekly Encore blog and subscribe to my newsletter. Again, Marianne's insights and her book will be highlighted this week on the newsletter on May 5th. And I highlight all my guests' insights because our ability to share and receive wisdom from one another is crucial to navigating the chaos that we might experience, the detours that we might come across, and to stabilize our life and to focus on fulfillment and self-actualization. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day.